Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm going to show you two ways to make a little paper pamphlet that can be used as a little memo book for yourself, or you can tuck inside junk journals. Now, the two methods are really quite easy. One involves minimal sewing, just really a simple stitch 3 times, and you make a few knots. The second method uses a stapler, so it really couldn't be easier. But the result is great. You can use up scrap papers, or you can tailor it to your junk journal by theme or color. And it's a great way to use up textured paper because it looks really extravagant, but it's super easy. So let me show you the technique.
So these are the little pamphlets. I think they're wonderful. They can be very simple, where it's just a cover page made to any size. This is just some pattern paper with different types of paper inside. I just tore the edge, and as you can see, they're all different sizes, but they do have similar lengths. Or you can make them all the same size. These are just a bunch of extra papers I had, so this will make it perfect to tuck into a junk journal. Again, some other beautiful papers that I wanted to use up. These are bound with a simple sewing technique, which I'll show you. And these are bound with staples. So if you don't want to sew, you don't have to. And you can make this, it's just a little pamphlet. These are just old book pages. But you can make them with plain paper and make a small little pamphlet to keep a little sort of memo book with you, either in your purse or your car, just something that's really handy. And let me show you the materials that we'll use to create these pamphlets. So if you want to create your booklet the simplest way, you just take your paper, a paper cutter, or even a pair of scissors, and a stapler. If you want to sew them, you need some thread here. This is just waxed linen thread. I have just a tapestry needle here. It's not even a specialty needle. Very inexpensive. You can find them in any place that sells sewing needles, like a craft store or online. And then I have an awl to poke holes to make my sewing. I keep a little cork on the end of the awl so that I don't stab myself. Works most of the time. And then I have some clips. The clips are optional, but they do make it just slightly easier. You can make the pamphlet any number of pages you want. If you want it really thick, I suggest sewing it. If you just want a few pages, the stapler will work just fine. So the first method I'll show you is with a stapler. Now, to create these booklets, I like to use a little heavier paper for the cover. It's completely optional. If you don't have heavy paper, just use what you have. And then here I'm just taking some papers that I printed with my gel plate. You could use plain papers, you could use book print, pattern paper, scrapbook paper, any type of paper you want. And I like this purple color theme, so that's what I'm going with. If I really wanted something extraordinary, I would make sure the papers were printed on both sides. But for the junk journals, because I'll probably embellish them further, or even for making lists, it's kind of nice to have the blank page. So the first thing I want to do is cut them into strips. Now you want to make sure that your cover is at least the same size height, if not a little taller. So I'm using a 12 by 12 piece of paper here. These are 8.5 by 11. To make this easy, I'm just going to cut everything into 3-inch strips, and from there I'll see where they lie, where they fall. And this technique, cutting the paper to the same width with a cover slightly taller, or at least the same height as the papers themselves, will be the same for whether you're using the sewing method or the stapler method. So right now I'm just going to cut them into 3-inch lengths. I need 1 piece of paper for the cover, and then because I have 4 sheets here, I'll just cut 4 sheets for my pages. You can double this up if you want a larger pamphlet. And I'll cut 2 sets, so I can make 1 set with the stapler technique and 1 set with the sewing technique. So now I have my papers all cut into strips, my cover and my pages inside the pamphlet. I'm going to take my pages for the pamphlet, decide how I want them. If I want them alternating, maybe I'll do that so that there's 1 print and 1 white side, and then I'll just fold it in half. Just going to eyeball it here. It doesn't have to be completely perfect, although you can certainly make it as perfect as you want. and I burnish the top. You could use a bone folder, just use the end of my finger. So here's the pamphlet itself, and when I turn the pages, I can see all the different prints on them. If you want, you can trim up that edge a little neater. That seems to work for me. So now I want to take my cover strip, and I know it's larger when I fold it in half than my pages, but I'm going to fold it in half just the same, and then I tuck my pages inside. And as you can see, there is a little overlap, so I want to trim this down. So you can take your paper cutter. I'm just going to use a pair of scissors. I'm going to make sure my pages are butted up against the fold. Take my clips and clip on either side. Because this isn't too many pages and I'm only going to be cutting the covers, I'll use a pair of scissors, and I'm just going to cut across the cover, just like this. And then I'll flip it over and do the same. You can round the corners if you want, it's totally up to you. So now I'll remove the clips. The clips just give it a nicer effect. They're completely optional. And I want to make sure that my folds all line up from the cover to the pages, and I'll replace the clips. I like to do it on one side of the fold here. So now I want to add my staples. You can eyeball this completely. I'm just going to kind of just place where I want my staples to go. Right on the fold, like that. I am going to staple it so that the smooth side of the staple is on the outside, and I'll just kind of make a little mark here. I wouldn't do this normally, but to demonstrate, it's a lot easier if I have that mark. And then I just take my stapler. Now, this stapler is kind of unique because it swings out so that I can put it in here and get the exact placement I want. I might have to move these down a little. I line up the edge of that stapler right to that fold. And when it's exact, I just press it down. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'll swap my clip over here, line up my pamphlet, and then I have the smooth edge of the staples on the outside. I can remove my clips, and then I have a very nice little booklet. You can fold it up, tuck it under, tear off edges, change up the shape of the paper inside if you like, as long as it's within the width and the length of that book. Really couldn't be simpler. Now, to make the book that's sewn, it's very simple. I'm going to go through the same steps that I went through to make the stapler book. This time I'm just going to leave all of my printed pages in the same direction, and I'll again fold it in half. You can trim it to whatever length you want if you want a shorter book, but for this project I wanted these longer pages, these rectangular shaped pages. And again, I'll do the same thing where I fold my cover, place the pages inside the cover, making sure they line up neatly, and then I'll trim the cover. So I apply the clips, take my scissors and trim, and now I'm ready to make that sewn binding. It sounds more intimidating than it is. It really is quite simple. So now I'm going to remove the clips, make sure my papers line up, and find that fold. I want to make sure that fold is nice and taut all together, as you can see here. And then I'll take the clips, and again I'll take one side and clip it. And this holds the paper together, and it maintains that little hold. So now I want to make 3 holes to make this simple binding. You can measure it with a ruler. I'm going to eyeball it. Start in the center, roughly make a little mark, and then I'll just make 2 more marks on either side. They're not perfectly centered, but they can be. So now I'm going to take that awl. If you don't have an awl, you can even use the end of your needle. And I always start from the center. I want to make sure that I puncture through all layers of the paper coming out on that folded spine. And with an awl, I just drill it gently. And I'll do it with all 3 holes. And you can see it's coming out. Here's the middle one. And now I'll drill that last hole. Because it's only a few pieces of paper, it does not take a lot of pressure. And I'm not trying to create a large hole, just enough to get my needle and thread through. So now, for the thread, the rule of thumb is you measure 3 times the height of what you want to go through. I like to give it a very generous 3 times. I'd rather not have to cut out new thread or attach thread. Then I'm going to take my tapestry needle, which has a generous eye size, thread the needle, and because this waxed linen thread is stiff, it threads very easily. I like to create a long tail. I'm going to start in the center hole, and I pull my thread through, and I like to leave 3 or 4 inches. When you get really proficient at this, you don't need to leave quite as much length. Then I'll come through 1 hole. I'm going to go on the top of my book here. I'm going to go on the hole on the right, thread it all through, pull it taut, but not so tight that it's pulling or buckling the paper, but just so that it's snug. And then I'm going to go all the way across to that last hole. And I pull it, and I still have the tail on one side and then the thread here. Now to finish this, I just go in through that middle hole, and I'm trying to come out on the opposite side of the thread. Again, this is not a large book. It is forgiving. And then I'm just going to make a double knot. I'm going to stitch around and make a knot, and I'm trying to knot over this long piece of thread here. And then I'll make a second knot. Now I do have a lot of thread left over. That's a preference that I like, just so that I don't feel stressed about having to make that knot. And then I'll cut that thread and just kind of brush it across. Then I have my sewn little pamphlet. So the difference between the stapled and the sewn, it's very easy, each method, depending on what you like. And then I have my little books. I really enjoy having an assortment of them, particularly to tuck in journals, or if I can just take one, no matter what the background is, and draw on it with colored pencil. It's really quite charming. So I hope you found this an easy little project to use up papers that you love, papers that you maybe don't love, and that you can add it to your junk journals or make a little notebook for yourself. It can be a little drawing notebook or one for lists.
So that's how I make pamphlets for my junk journal or my purse to store in to keep little notes in as I go out. It's a really great technique, uses up scraps of paper, and it can be tailored to make it even more elegant. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. And thank you for joining me today.